And it's a very good afternoon. It's Angela Clay from HR for UK for your lovely Friday afternoon webinar. Today's webinar, we are going to be covering the changing furlough schemes, handling reluctant workers, and health and safety advice, keeping your business safe. I'm going to let our attendees just log on. I can see them all trying to join in on the meeting today. So I hope that you're going to find this session really helpful and useful. Today I've decided to go with something a little bit different to get some of the experts in. Over the last couple of weeks, you've heard me bang on about doing the COVID-19 risk assessments. You've heard me bang on about talking to your employees when they are reluctant to come in. So I thought for a change today, we will hear it from the experts. So I can see those numbers have gone right up. So we've got a jam-packed session today. So I don't want to hang around waiting too long. So if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to start. So I am Angela Clay from HR for UK. HR for UK are a leading HR provider that provides HR and employment support for businesses, payroll, pension, and health and safety services. We've got over 30 years of experience, and we've got some fantastic 5-star reviews on our website. And I always encourage people to go and have a look at our website, go and read those reviews and find out for yourselves what others are saying about the work and support that we provide individuals. So as I said, I'm Angela Clay as an HR specialist and employment law solicitor. I'm the Managing Director for HR for UK, and I'm responsible for HR for UK's role in leading businesses out of this crisis by providing professional HR support for all UK organisations. As I've said many times before, my vision is for your business to come out of COVID-19, this crisis, successfully by offering you clear, professional, practical advice, and today is going to be no different to days before. So those of you who've been with me before, I think you know the deal. Please do let us have your questions. I know we've already had some pre-webinar questions come through, which have been absolutely fantastic, so we will be able to get to those as quickly as possible. But do remember that you've got the questions box in your panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Please do put those questions in. This is your webinar. This is your opportunity to put your questions forward so that we can answer you. And of course, if we can't give you a clear answer, we do come back with our questions and answers, which we do every week, and we will package it all up for you after the event. So really look forward to those questions coming through. And just as a reminder, you know, we are going to, this webinar is recorded. We do package it up with the Q&As. With today's session, we've got a couple of handouts which you'll be able to see in the right-hand box. Don't worry about printing them off. Don't worry about trying to go and find them. You will get our email after this webinar with everything packaged up for you, so you can have a look at it at your leisure. So today's webinar, we are talking about helping businesses provide a safe working environment for employees to come back to work. And it's all about that all-important risk assessment, because this will essentially tell you who can come back to work, what workplace changes you need to implement, ultimately if there is going to be enough members of staff to come back to work, is there going to be enough work for you to actually open up your business. And you might even, despite taking all these safety precautions, there may be some staff that are still reluctant to return to work. Not all businesses are ready to return. Not all businesses are ready to bring all of their staff back. As we come out of lockdown and all the you know, we have these announcements on a fairly regular basis as the lockdown is being eased, so different businesses are being able to come back into what we used to know as normal, which is no longer the normal that we used to know. But you know, there are still certain things that we have to do, and we have to make sure that we do it properly and correctly to make sure that we safeguard our businesses from protecting them from any potential claims that may arise. So today you're going to be hearing it from the experts. As I said before, we've got Lucy Walsh and we've got Anna Harrington who have joined me today. Today, we're going to be covering some top tips on completing your COVID-19 risk assessment and complying with health and safety law, and that's going to be delivered to you by Lucy Walsh. We're then going to go over to Anna Harrington, who's going to be able to provide us with some easy solutions for handling reluctant staff who don't want to return to work. Some top tips for monitoring mental health for COVID-19. It's post-COVID-19. Everybody is dealing it with a different way. Everybody is taking the lockdown and the return from lockdown differently, and it's been it's being able to listen and identify concerns and addressing those concerns. So without any more chit chat from me, I'm going to hand you over to Lucy Walsh, our health and space, put my teeth in, our health and safety expert, who's going to give you some top tips on completing your COVID-19 risk assessment and how to comply with health and safety law. So Lucy, over to you. Okay, I think we are having a little bit of technical difficulty there. I think we've had Lucy talking to herself. So if we can just try. There we go, Lucy, we've now got you up and running. Apologies about that. Thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you for that, Angela. Yes, I wondered what was going on there. So yeah, Lucy Walsh from Crystal Clear Compliance, looking after everybody's health and safety needs really, and wanting to share a little bit of advice with you this afternoon. So thank you, Angela, for inviting me to be a part of this. It is a very important subject. As you know, the government is currently talking constantly, we're hearing it all the time about these return to work risk assessments. They are really important. They are there to make sure that there is a safe return for all businesses. The purpose is to help you understand what's required, as Angela pointed out earlier, and without the risk assessment, you won't know what those areas are and what you will need to do to put in place. As a business, you should already have some risk assessments in place, and these are a great starting point. So I would say dig these out and use these as part of your COVID risk assessment to get the foundations to understand what the business needs. As an employer, you need to protect people from harm. That's the whole point of this, and that's the whole point of having risk assessments for your business. This includes making sure that you take the reasonable steps to protect your workers and others from currently this coronavirus. You need to identify what the work activity is and the situations that may cause the spread. So with the risk assessment, the whole purpose is to have some consultation with your employees, discuss any anxieties they may have, work out, as Angela said, who can come back and who can't come back, because until you've asked those questions, you won't know what you've got to put in place. Once you start that process, there's lots of things that you need to consider. And obviously, everybody's business, everybody's sector, everybody's premises, they're all going to be slightly different. But you need to appreciate and look at the demographics of those areas. You need to look at the layout of the workspace, of the configuration. Is it a shared building? Is it, multi-tenanted? Are you responsible for all areas, or are you only responsible for some areas? You need to consider things like maybe shift patterns. It could be that you have a phased return into your risk assessment and process into your return to work. So it could be that you can get people back, but it's easier to bring them in at staggered times during the morning so that you don't have everybody coming in at once. But until you start to really sit down and look at all the areas, understand who can come back, what work activities can take place, and then what measures you need to put in place, you won't be able to find those solutions. And I kind of hope that makes sense. You've got to do the groundwork first to be able to then say, right, okay, this is where we go, and these are the things that we need to put in place. And some of the things that you may want to put in place, they don't have to be complicated. It's all about being sensible and practical. We keep hearing everybody talking about PPE and face masks. Yes, they're there, they're an option, and they may well need to be used depending on what your work activity is and your working environment. But there are other little things that you may wish to consider And I know that Angela and I've got some top tips there that we've pulled together for you for some examples. But even simple things like if you feel that you don't have enough space in your office, then maybe you've got a meeting room, which would mean that some of your desks can be spaced out and people could work from the meeting room. Even little things like taking the chairs away from areas means that people can't sit, so you're helping them to make those decisions not to overcrowd areas. Leaving doors open if they're not fire doors. Please don't ever mess with fire doors under your fire risk assessment. But simple things like maybe there is a door to the photocopying room or something. Leave the door open. It means that less people touch the door, less risk of contamination and things like that. So I hope that we've been able to share with you a few little tips and pointers, but really my big advice is to do this risk assessment. If you employ over 5 people, it has to be documented. I would say even if you don't employ 5 people, still document it, still keep reviewing it and still going back to it. But most importantly, communicate with your workforce. They may have some great ideas that will assist you with the risk assessment. Get a team of you to do it so it's not maybe one person's role and responsibility. And also, once you've completed the risk assessment and you know what measures you're putting in place, again, before you return those people to work, you need to communicate that to them. Let them understand what the changes are and what the new way of working is going to be and what they are required to do to comply with that. It's a bit like a training and reinduction program. So I hope that's given you some help and advice. All the information and everything, and please, it will all be provided for you, as Angela has said. And you can obviously get in touch with us via HR for UK. So I hope that's helped, and I'd love to hand back to Angela now for some more information.
There we go. Technology is working for us today, everybody. So Lucy, thank you very much. That's been very helpful, because I think what a lot of businesses need to understand is those little top tips. And I think what you were saying about the photocopying room is a fantastic example of where people go in to, you don't even think about it. And there's lots of surfaces that can get touched. So again, taking away that risk of touching something inadvertently is going to go a long way to help prevent that spread of COVID-19. And again, the example of moving chairs about, I hadn't even thought of that. And I think that's a brilliant idea, because you're taking away, subconsciously, you're taking away that opportunity to sit down too close to someone and keeping that risk, that social distancing. So some really, really good ideas there. And of course, risk assessments are very important, and they need to be carried out before staff return to work. It's no good doing it once they're already in the office. It must be carried out before they actually return to work. Now, we know that many businesses will carry out their COVID-19 risk assessments. They will implement the measures to make sure that there's a safe working environment, but there may still be some employees who are reluctant, or some employees may just flatly refuse to return back to work. So I'm going to hand you over to Anna Harrington now, who's going to be able to provide you with some top tips on how to give you some easy solutions from an occupational health point of view, on how to handle those reluctant employees who don't want to return to work, or who have got those who are scared or don't want to come back to work. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Angela, for that introduction. And also thank you, Angela, for giving me this opportunity to come here and talk to you about reluctant employees and what you can do to gain understanding as to why they might be reluctant to return back into the workplace. That was a fantastic talk from you, Lucy, as well. Thank you for that and giving that overview of the risk assessment process, which is absolutely, utterly key in this. So I'm going to read you out a paragraph. So simply because an employee is not on the extremely clinically vulnerable list or the vulnerable list does not mean that they may not need to shield, or that they may not have particular individual vulnerabilities, which means that if they caught the virus, they would be subject to a greater chance of suffering its effects more seriously from others. This paragraph comes from a barrister's chambers called Cloisters, and they're absolutely spot on. I should have said I am a specialist community public health nurse. My specialist area is occupational health. So what I have to say is that there could be real valid reasons, health reasons, as to why your employees are reluctant in returning back into work. The government shielding process, so the way that they have used, or the methods that they have used to define who needs to shield, so those extremely clinically vulnerable and also those who they've been told that they are vulnerable, is actually incredibly blunt. Also, as this virus has progressed, the medical information about how it is impacting people has been gathered, and that has changed who we know is more at risk than other people. A real common example, actually, I'll give to you is about people who have asthma. So initially, when COVID virus, when we became more aware of it, people who had asthma were identified as having a high risk or even extremely clinically vulnerable. Now, as time has gone on, we actually know that this isn't definitely the case. It depends. So what does it depend on? Well, there are a number of factors that it depends on. It depends on the age of the person, and that's not just the age of 70, it's actually lower than that and different ages. It depends on their gender. We know that men tend to experience this illness more severely than females. We don't know why yet. It depends on their ethnicity. We know that the Black population tend to experience this virus more severely than other ethnicities, but also Asian and mixed race ethnicities tend to experience this virus more severely. It depends on the details of the health condition. It depends on the treatments that they are having or that they have had. So what the Society of Occupational Medicine have done is that they have collated all of this medical evidence and they've put together a tool that we as health professionals, occupational health professionals, use to give the individual a COVID age. That COVID age connects with your risk assessment. It connects with your risk assessment outcome as to whether areas of your business remain with the very high risk level of the virus being transmitted, medium level or low level. So depending on what the COVID age of the individual is, will depend on what they can and shouldn't do at work. Okay, so I strongly advise that actually you look at your employee group. You use my form that is in this package that you're going to get to identify those people who should have the individual COVID age health vulnerability assessment with an occupational health advisor. But putting that aside, so that's one reason why people are going to be reluctant. The other reason is because this virus and the consequences of it in terms of lockdown mean that people's mental health has been affected. People are frightened. They're understandably frightened. They're frightened of the virus. They're frightened of change. They're also experiencing possibly impacts on their finances. They may even have experienced bereavements as well. So as a business, you do need to take time. You need to take time to actually listen to your employees' concerns and offer empathy, offer understanding. Take small, little, tiny steps in terms of encourage them back into the workplace. And, you know, spot on with what Lucy was saying earlier about involving your employee group in that risk assessment process, because that will help them to feel more reassured. It will help them to feel valued by you as an organisation and business. And that in itself is going to hopefully enable them to return back into work. if there are people who have particular mental health problems and these methods that I've suggested there just aren't overcoming them, I do then advise that, yeah, you get in touch with an occupational health advisor. I'm actually offering some free advice telephone consultation, 20-minute advice. You can just go onto my website and get booked onto one of those. And I can talk to you about actually, you know, what can we do in this situation to try and encourage this employee back into the workplace. So I hope that has given you a little bit of insight into why some employees might be reluctant about coming back into work. Yeah, why they might absolutely say, no, I'm not coming back, and what you can do to help resolve that situation and resolve it in a collaborative and a partnership approach. So if you do need any further information, you can always, you know, contact Angela at HR for UK, to whom I will now pass you back to. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Anna. That's been really interesting. And I have to be honest and say, I had no idea that COVID had a COVID age attached to it. It had never had any bearing on anything that I have dealt with before. So I did find that really helpful and really useful. You know, I'm sure our listeners would want to find out a little bit more about that and how it actually applies to their business. But I think from an HR point of view, certainly a lot of the questions that we've had coming in is a lot of employees who have perhaps had asthma, various levels of asthma, have certainly, you know, those are the type of questions that have come into us. So that was really good. Thank you. And we will come up with those questions. There are a couple of questions that are coming in. If you can just a quick reminder to our listeners, the experts are here to answer those questions, so don't forget to put in those questions in your question box, which should be on the right hand side of your screen. So we're going to move over to the next sort of big part of today's webinar, which is changing furlough schemes to maximise funds and to maximise those wage costs. So before we get onto the details of that, let's just have a look at a couple of things you might have missed in the last week or so. So it's now too late for you to put someone on furlough for the first time. The deadline was Wednesday, so if you missed that deadline, it is too late. But if someone has been furloughed previously or is currently on furlough, they will still be eligible to continue to benefit from the scheme until it ends on the 31st of October. And that is on either scheme, whether it's going to be the flexible furlough scheme or the original scheme. But what it is closed to new entrants. So hopefully none of you missed that deadline on Wednesday. There is one exception, and this is an exception that has only come to light in the last week, is unless you are a parent returning from statutory maternity or paternity leave, you will remain eligible to go onto the furlough scheme even if you have not been furloughed before. So this means for the first time, it's a bit late, I think, if you ask me, but it's the first time that the government has actually come out and said parents who are on statutory maternity or paternity leave can be furloughed even if they haven't been furloughed before under the new scheme. So the flexible furlough scheme comes into effect from the 1st of July. At the moment, we have very few details. What we do know is that the furlough period will be needs to be at least 1 week. We know that currently that is 3 weeks. We are expecting guidance to come out today. I keep checking my emails to see whether it has actually been published. We know from previous experience that we've had, you know, the changes coming to force literally as I'm speaking to you. Perhaps it might be today, or perhaps it might be a little bit more complex and the government is waiting until 5 o'clock this evening, where us HR professionals will all scrabble and try and understand what the guidance means so we can digest it and share it with you by Monday. But as soon as those new guidance notes come out in relation to the flexible furlough scheme, you will be the first to know because I will let you know. Another thing that you might want to not think about is don't think of an acronym for the flexible furlough scheme. And I'll just leave it at that. But if you have a spare 5 minutes over the weekend, just for a little bit of Friday afternoon fun, you might want to watch a very funny Michael McIntyre video about his visit to a fortune teller in 2019. We will send out the link to you, and hopefully you won't get distracted by going to go and find it. We will send it out to you, but it is just a little bit of Friday afternoon fun. But let's have a look at some more serious things in relation to how an employee is paid if they are working and they are on furlough. It almost seems like a contradiction, but this is exactly what the flexible furlough scheme is. And what it means is that employers will remain responsible for paying employees for the hours that they actually work. And this will include the tax and national insurance contributions due to those worked hours. So it's not only the worked hours, you will also be responsible for that tax and national insurance contributions. You will still be able to claim the shortfall between the hours actually worked and the normal hours up to that 80% cap. Employers will be able to claim for the national insurance contributions and pension contributions for the hours that haven't been worked. So it is a split contribution that needs to be paid. Some of it is subsidised, some of it isn't. So it is going to start having an impact on your cash flow. The level of grant will be applicable to the time that is made. So if, for example, you are making a claim from the 1st of July to the 31st of July, 80% of the employee's normal hours will need to be paid up to that cap of £2,500. So from the 1st of July, as I said, there will be no changes in terms of the contribution that the employer needs to make, either in terms of the tax and national insurance or in terms of the top up to the 80%. So from the 1st of July to the 31st of July, 31st of July, the government will continue to pay 80% of employers' wages up to that cap of £2,500. Except in circumstances where you have brought employees back on that flexible furlough scheme. If they're on the flexible furlough scheme, you will be responsible in paying for those hours that they work. So if an employee returns part-time, the employer will have to be paying the wages, tax and national insurance for those hours worked. It changes in August. So we know that from our webinar last week, there is a step change in August. So from August, employers will be responsible for paying all national insurance contributions and pension contributions. So that's everything in terms of the tax, NI and auto-enrolment contributions. From the 1st of August, the government will continue to subsidise and pay 80% of the wages up to that cap of £2,500. But as I said, employers will need to start paying the national insurance and pension contributions. We then move on to the September step change, where the percentage paid by the government is going to be decreased, and there will be a corresponding decrease in that cap. So the employer will have to start paying, the 10% towards the employee wages. So the key thing to remember in all of these step changes is that the employee will always receive 80% of their wages up to a cap of £2,500. And how that split is going to work is going to split as the months progress. So again, just going back to September, because I got a little bit sidetracked there. I saw a couple of questions coming in, so I apologise. I do get sidetracked, but from the 1st of September, the government would reduce the coronavirus jobs retention scheme contribution to 70%. The cap will be lowered, and that cap will go to £2,187.50. Employers will continue to use the scheme, will have to pick up the increased employer costs on two fronts. So not only will the employer have to pick up the costs from the national insurance contributions and pension contributions, They will also have to pick up the percentage difference between the government contribution and the to get that up to that 80%. So in September, that will be 10% that will need to be added to your cash flow that you need to account for. So from October, we know that there is a further step change. So the government will continue, the government support will continue to decrease. It will decrease further by the percentage paid and the salary cap. So the employer will still be responsible for national insurance contributions and pension contributions, which obviously would have, commenced in part in July. Obviously, August is where the full element of that has been introduced, and the percentage for salaries will then dip down to 60% of their wages. And again, the cap will decrease down to £1,875 in October. So employers will need to top up to that additional 20% to make sure that employees' salaries do not dip below that 80%. But the big question comes is, what about November? What about December? So November, December, and as the scheme has come to a close in October, you will need to pay, unless you come to some other arrangement with your employees, you will have to pick up the full payroll wage bill, as well as employer contributions in tax, national insurance, and auto enrollment contributions. So from November, it's going to have a huge impact from only having to pay 20% to suddenly having to pay that 100%. So November is going to be a real crunch point for a lot of employers, where this COVID-19 is really going to have an impact on cash flow. So the question is, how do we go about ending furlough? Now, of course, that will depend. It will depend on whether a furlough agreement has been issued and what that agreement itself says. If there is an agreement and there are specific terms in that agreement, you will need to comply with that. So if the agreement says you need to give 1 week's notice, then you need to make sure that you comply with that 1 week's notice. But I think certainly our agreements that we have, there was no prescribed notice period to come back. So notice will need to be reasonable notice that they are required to return to work. And that will need to be communicated to your employees. And it's normally best practice to do that in writing, so that you have that audit trail of when the employee was unfurloughed. It's not necessary for you to go into consultation to agree that the employee needs to return. The default position is that they do go back to work. But I do caveat that with our COVID-19 risk assessment, sharing that with your workforce and making sure that everybody is happy and satisfied that they are coming back into a safe working environment. So that is the default position. But where there is an express, as I said, where there is an express agreement in the furlough agreement as to how that notice is going to be given, whether there is a prescribed notice period, you must comply with that and not just expect employees to drop everything and return to work. Reasonable notice is, what would any other business in the similar circumstances be reasonable? In some cases, 24 hours notice will be reasonable. If you've got, the government lifting lockdown and allowing certain types of businesses to open, we usually get, and I say usually, we usually get at least a week. Sometimes we get very short notice, but it's down to you as the employer to communicate with your team as to when you are expecting them to come back into work. So again, it's really important to consider what steps, if necessary, you need to take before those employees come back to work. We've heard it from Lucy Walsh, we've heard it from Anna Harrington, and you've heard it from me so many times how important it is to consider health and safety, doing that consultation, consider reasonable adjustments, particularly if you've got some disabled employees, and whether there are different groups of employees that need to be treated differently. So again, it's really important. So what happens to pay when you are ending furlough? So we've talked about the phased changes. The default position is pay will return to normal. In other words, employees will be entitled to receive 100% of their normal pay. So normal pay is what they should be entitled to. So if while your employees have been on furlough, you have topped up their wages to 100%, bringing them back in off furlough and back into normal work shouldn't be an issue, because they'll just be receiving what they should be receiving and what they have been receiving. But not many employers have been in that position to be able to top up wages. So even if under a furlough agreement you have agreed to those 80% of wages, there shouldn't really be an issue returning back. Issues will arise when you are trying to return staff to work, and I'm talking about the November period now rather than the next couple of months. If you intend to reduce pay when you have defurloughed staff, presumably you might need to do that after November, well, from the beginning of November. It'll be because of economic cost reasons. You may not be able to carry on paying what staff were being paid prior to COVID-19, and you may need to go into reduced pay. This is a prescribed process that you need to go to, and you need to start thinking about that, because any changes in contracts of employment, which is going to affect the hours of pay, the hours of work, which is going to have the corresponding pay, you will need to consider that in good time so that you can consult with your staff, you can try and seek agreement to make those contractual changes. Because if you don't get their agreement and you don't make those payments, any non-payment of full wages will amount to a breach of contract. Now, not only does that give rise to an unlawful deduction of wages claim, it's especially significant if an employee then wants to take advantage of the repudiatory breach, so the wrongdoing on the employer's part, because they might want to use that to escape post-termination restrictions or to get out of fixed-term contract. So it's really important that if you are going to make those contractual changes, that you do consult in good time with your staff to make that reduction in wages. And everybody should be looking at their cash flow at the moment to see how you can best take advantage of safeguarding your business by doing the right thing early on. Obviously, if you can't reach agreement, you're going to have that staunch, stubborn employee who's not going to want to agree to reduced hours and not going to want to agree to those reduced corresponding pay. It's open to the employer to either dismiss, of course, following a proper process, re-engage on new terms, but that is subject to the usual risks, and we will always advise anybody who wants to go through that process to get the legal advice. Nothing that I say in these webinars should be deemed as legal advice, and we would strongly advise you to make sure that you get that sound support and guidance to keep you on the right side of the law. So I think I've capped everything that I had. I really wanted to make sure that we kept quite a bit of time in today's webinar so we can deal with those all-important questions. So what I'm going to do, as I say, we've got a couple of questions here. I'm going to get our technical team to bring both Lucy and Anna back so that can help answer questions. So we've got Anna back and we've got Lucy back. Welcome back, ladies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we've had a question that has come in, and I think we've all got an answer to give here. So the question has come in is, I have asked my employees to return to work, but they have said that they are scared. What should I do? So first, to Lucy, from a health and safety perspective, what would you say to this question?
Okay, I think the first thing is to have shown them the risk assessment. If they haven't already been involved, if they haven't already had some consultation with them about the phasing, getting back into the work, I would say you share everything with them. You share the risk assessment. They can see the measures that are going to be put in place. They can see and understand what's going to happen. And then gradually talk them through it. Gradually, you've got to communicate with them to get them to understand what's needed and what the changes will be. And if they raise a very valued point that maybe has been missed on the risk assessment, that's the prime opportunity to keep going back and reviewing the risk assessment. But treat it like a bit of a change process, treat it like a communication, an awareness talk, and a new induction, if you like, because this is going to be strange times for people to come back to, and they're going to have to get used to working differently. So I hope that sort of started the process of the sharing the information and how that they've reached the decision of where and how they're going to get people back to work.
I think that's a very, very valid response. Thank you, Lucy. So Anna, from an occupational health point of view, what would you respond to that question, or how would you respond to that question?
Well, the question goes back, doesn't it? Why? Tell me more. Tell me more. What exactly are you concerned about? I'd start to relate it to, well, what are you doing in normal day-to-day life? Have you kept, completely self-isolated? Because some people actually have, even though there's no necessity to do so, because they are so terrified of that. They've actually kept themselves, indoors. And if that is the case, then I would advise that maybe they start to, exit their house. First of all, go into their garden, then maybe go down to the shop. So it's a step-by-step approach of breaking this down. If it's an individual who has actually been doing lots of activities outside of the house, they've been doing that daily exercise, they've been going to the supermarket, then try and compare it with what you've got going on in the workplace and associate it with that. And again, I would bring in that method of it's a real step-by-step. So invite them into the workplace, not to do any work whatsoever. It's purely just let's reconnect, let's have a social chat, 2 meters distancing, obviously, in the workplace. And maybe at that time, actually start to walk them around the workplace to show them what you've done, what things you've actually implemented. And hopefully then they will be able to feel a lot more confident in taking that step actually back into work. And also, absolutely what Lucy has said, they may be able to offer you some great suggestions as to how to make the workplace safe.
That's a very good answer, and I think the key takeaway from that is sharing the information and trying to understand the real concerns. And I think the real concerns is what's really important, because I think that will give an employer insight into sort of understanding what the barriers are. And of course, an employer can perhaps implement some changes which will break down those barriers, making an employee feel a little bit more comfortable about returning into work. So I would certainly, from an HR point of view, I would urge employers to take socially responsible decisions and listen carefully to what the concerns are raised. Yes, there might be some real valid concerns there. Equally, there might be some concerns that for us as an employer, you might think, oh, that's not really a concern. But again, it's about opening that communication, having those open and honest conversations to try and understand what that real concern is. What is that real barrier? And of course, employers and employees should always try and come to a pragmatic agreement about the working relationship and the working arrangements, because it is really important to safeguard, that employment ongoing relationship, because it's not just in the here and now, it's going forward. So brilliant. So I'll go on to the next question, which again sounds a little bit like the one that we've just had. But again, I'll ask the question, what can I do if my employee doesn't want to return to work from furlough and they don't have a medical certification notification to shield? So Anna, that, although it sounds like a similar sort of question, what would you say to answer that question?
Okay, so from that question, I'm assuming that the employee has declared that there is some health reason for them to feel quite concerned about returning back into work. So what you can do, you can use my form in the package that you're going to get, and that will identify, it'll start to identify what their COVID age is and whether actually that individual does need to have an individual health assessment. And sometimes, even if it doesn't indicate having that health assessment, having that consultation with a health professional does actually ease their concerns, because they're given that time You know, GPs actually only have 10 minutes in their consultations. But there are, you know, in these type assessments that I'm offering, I'm actually doing these for 30 minutes. So plenty of time to explore with the individual about their health problems and about the significance, the severity of those, and how does that connect with the COVID-19 virus and their vulnerability to their virus. So, you know, a lot of this will always come back to listening to the employee and allowing them to express their concerns.
Fantastic. That sounds like a really good answer there. So another question that's come up, in fact, there's two questions here that seem to have overlapped, but they have the same sort of sense about it. So the question is, I have an employee who has to take public transport to get to work. The government says that public transport should not be used. How do I overcome that problem in getting my employee into work? So again, I suppose, you know, there's quite a few answers to that. We know that the government has sort of said, if you know, well, I know they have opened public transport because they have sort of expressed that you need to, you know, if you're going to be going on public transport, you need to have a face mask. But the guidance really is sort of saying don't use it, you know, rather cycle or walk into work. Lucy, perhaps from a health and safety point of view, what would your comments be, or what would your advice be in trying to address that sort of issue of perhaps employees who have to get public transport into work?
Yeah, that's a really difficult one actually, because obviously we've seen on the news and stuff recently that the roads were much busier on those first few days back because everyone was avoiding public transport, so the traffic was worse. I suppose if the person has got the opportunity to not use public transport and drive into work or cycle into work or walk into work, that's obviously a good option. But of course, with that, and this will be on part of the risk assessment, is that the facility might not have enough space to accommodate everybody driving or coming into work that way. So there's a bit of a situation there that would need to be addressed. If the person can't drive into work, say, or cycle or whatever, and has got to use public transport, maybe there are ways, and they're saying suggestions that the person might be fearful for using public transport because of rush hour times when it is going to be more busy. So maybe there's an option, and again, this is, you know, linking in with HR and what is possible for the employer and the employee. But it could be that they can start a little bit later and avoid that peak time when it may be busier. So, and again, until you do that risk assessment process and look at how people are going to come in, what the concerns are and everything else, you won't be able to offer the advice and support the employees to make sure that they're comfortable to come back in the right way. But as we've seen, face masks are mandatory. But if they can avoid peak times, that may be an option, but it won't work for everybody.
Okay, that's a very good answer. Thank you, Lucy. And again, of course, it goes without saying that if there is still the option for employees to continue working from home, that is, of course, the preferred you know, answer at the moment, but not every sort of job can be carried out from home. So it's really important to really identify, is it really essential for that particular employee who has to get on that public transport to come in? The other part of the question, and as I said, there was two elements to it, is about you know, having to share a vehicle. So of course, I know the government was very much, you know, quite some time ago, very much about, you know, car share. You know, if there's 4 of you that can share a car, you know, to do that. But of course now, you know, that is one of the big things that we can't do. So again, I suppose it's understanding, and again, I think it comes back to communicating, having that open and honest conversation with each individual employee. It's not a one size fits all, and it's about taking the time to understand what those concerns are, what the challenges that the employee themselves are going to be facing when coming into work. Okay, so the next question we have here is, do I have to top up my employee's salary to 100% if they are on furlough during the notice? their notice being as a result of a resignation. Okay, so that's very much an HR question, so I'll pick up that one. I'm not too sure whether these Anna or Lucy would be able to answer that. So again, the notice period is a very complex area of whether the pay needs to be topped up. In this specific question, it has been asked is as a result of an employee tendering their notice by resignation. So it's the employee's choice to be leaving the business. They presumably have, and it's not clear from the question, they presumably have a furlough agreement, which means that they have agreed to only receive 80% of their wages. So if an employee has resigned, the notice that they will be entitled to will only be 80%. They are not entitled to the 100%. Of course, the position changes if the employer has served notice, whether that notice is because of a redundancy situation or whatever the case may be. Again, notice is very complex, very complicated on how to calculate whether it should be 100% notice, because it will depend on whether it is the statutory notice or whether it is enhanced notice. So again, it'll be a contractual versus statutory that we will need to have a look at. So rather than guessing, I would suggest that you get in contact and we will give you the exact answer on whether you need to top up your employees' pay. The next question that we have, again, apologies ladies, it's another HR question, is can I ask employees to take holiday while on furlough? And will this be different under the flexible furlough scheme? So the answer to the second part of that question is we don't know whether it will be different under the flexible furlough scheme because we haven't had the detailed guidance. All we know about the flexible furlough scheme is what the contributions are going to be in terms of what the employer has to pay. But under the current scheme, so the existing scheme, yes, employers can ask employees to take their holiday whilst on furlough. And of course, any holiday pay must be topped up to their normal remuneration. But I think actually, if I think about that question a little bit further, it actually brings me back to the comment that Anna was talking about earlier about the mental health of employees in terms of, you know, lockdown. So Anna, what would your view be on, you know, requiring employees to take holiday while on furlough? Of course, it's time to have rest and relaxation, and I'm sure it's a time where employees should really actually be taking that time to have that mental break and having that rest and relaxation. Would you say that that is a fair comment to say? If we just get some volume there. Okay, we appear to have lost audio. If you just bear with us 1 second, we will get that back up.
Can the ladies try to unmute themselves?
And can you try? Yeah, brilliant. You can hear the whispering going on. No, okay. Well, I'm really sorry. As always, I promise to everybody I will get that answer from Anna, and I will make sure that it's highlighted in our Q&A. So again, apologies. I think it would have been really fantastic to hear Anna's view on that. And Anna has disappeared from the screen. So again, the question, you're back, brilliant. So again, a couple of, there's 2 more questions that I have here. You know, I am conscious that we are about to turn into pumpkins, but just 2 more questions, and then I will just wrap up on where you can get some further help and support. Can I bring employees back from furlough on reduced hours? I think I've already answered that question in my session a little bit earlier. Yes, you can. It depends on whether they're going to be coming onto reduced hours, going onto the flexible furlough scheme, or whether you are going to be talking about reduced hours once we get to that 1st of November pinch point where we need to perhaps consider a variation of terms. And the other question that has been asked is, can I make redundancies while staff are on furlough? Of course you can. There has been clear guidance that it is permitted to start redundancy consultation. As we know, the scheme changes at the end of the July, so 31st of July, is where you get the full support from the government. So a lot of businesses are already starting to think about making redundancies. Indeed, next week is quite a big pinch point for where you need to get collective collective redundancy consultation needs to start. So again, depending on the number of employees that you are contemplating or thinking about making redundant will depend on where you need to start that redundancy process. Of course, with HR for UK, we are here to help you and support you. We have our paid for redundancy webinar workshop, which we have had a phenomenal response to. Sorry, we have a few technical difficulties today, so I'm really sorry. But of course, we have the workshop available, information and guidance sent out. I think I've come off of hearing myself repeat. I do apologise about that. We do have the paid for workshop. It is a redundancy workshop. It is to give you an overview on the redundancy process, to give you the comfort and knowledge to know on what you need to do. But of course, we do have our coronavirus crisis package where we go in and we help and support you in terms of making sure that businesses have the personal support and guidance to help them through making those tough decisions, consulting, in relation to what, your workforce is going to look like and what we need to do in terms of making sure that you get it right. So, again, we've got the paid for webinar and we also have that coronavirus crisis package. Please, please, please don't try and do it on your own, whether it's your COVID-19 risk assessment, whether it's speaking to employees in terms of occupational health, or whether it is going through a variation of terms, whether it is going through the redundancy process. I can't implore upon you enough that there is help there. Don't try and do it on your own. Don't try and think I'm going to cut corners and I'm going to try and do it myself. Of course, do it yourself, but do it yourself with that support and guidance behind you. There's nothing worse than if you are going to get it wrong, because getting it wrong can cost you dearly in so many different ways. There's not only the health and safety risks to it, where there is perhaps a dismissal that has gone wrong, and then there's a claim for a health and safety claim. Certainly from an employment law point of view, if you get it wrong, you don't want to find yourselves in an employment tribunal having to defend yourself, particularly when that cash flow is so important. You don't want to have to throw money away where it can be avoided. So again, we've got Lucy Walsh, who can help you with your health and safety, not just your COVID-19, but health and safety as a whole. We've got Anna, who can help you with your occupational health questions and queries. If you need any help from either of these ladies, the information is going to be on the slides that are going to come out. But do get in touch with me here through HR for UK, because we will be able to make sure that we put you in touch with the right people. You can get in contact with us through our website, which is www.hrforuk.com. You can email us, which is info@hrforuk.com. Yeah, that's the right one. I was getting a bit carried away with those .coms. Or you can telephone us on 01455 444 222 and speak to one of my colleagues, and we will be able to help you. As I say, and I say it every week, don't try and do it on your own. We are there to help. We are there to provide you with the support and guidance to make sure that your businesses come out of this crisis successfully. And you can only do that with the help and support of professional experts who can get you through it. So that's all from me for today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Lucy and Anna for joining me today. Just a quick reminder that you know, my webinars are every Friday, same place, same time, 3 o'clock. And next week's webinar is going to be talking about redundancy or return to work. So on that note, everybody, thank you very much for your time. Have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.